The book was rejected 12 times. 12 editors at 12 different London publishing houses turned it down between 1995 and 1996. Their reasons, when they gave reasons at all, were the same. Too long for a children's book. Too dark. Too dependent on a scene where an old wizard shows up in a suburban street and gives an infant to a family that will hate him for a decade. Not the sort of thing our readers are looking for. The 13th publisher, Bloomsbury, said yes. They printed 500 hardback copies of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in June of 1997. The book won the Nestlé Smarties Book Prize. It sold in Britain slowly at first, then very quickly. Then it sold in America. Then it sold in 80 other languages. By the time the 7th book in the series came out 10 years later, Harry Potter had become the highest-selling children's series in the history of publishing. 500 million copies. Not counting audiobooks, film tie-ins, or the plays. The claim I want to make today is not that the books are good, or bad, or overpraised, or underrated. The internet has been arguing about all of that for 25 years. The claim I want to make is that the first book, the one all 12 original editors rejected, is a much stranger and more deliberately engineered piece of fiction than most readers who love it, and most readers who dismiss it, have realized. There are at least 7 distinct layers of literary architecture buried in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Each of them is doing work. Each of them will pay off, sometimes only in Book 7, 10 years after the first reader closes Book 1. And once you can see them, you understand why the book behaves the way it does, why children read it obsessively, why adults keep coming back to it, and why the whole edifice of the 7-volume series held together for a decade of publication without ever collapsing under the weight of its own scale. Let me name the 7 layers, and then let me walk through them. Layer 1 is the boarding school novel. This is the most visible layer. Rowling is drawing, self-consciously, on a British literary tradition that runs from Tom Brown's school days in the 1850s, through Kipling's Storky and Company, through the school stories of Enid Blyton and Anthony Buckeridge that Rowling herself grew up on. Boarding school as a self-contained world. Prefects. Houses. Feasts. Sport. A trip to the village on weekends. A quiet corner in the library. The boarding school novel gives Rowling her furniture, dorms, common rooms, 4-poster beds, the timetable, and it gives her the emotional register of a certain kind of British childhood. The reason so many non-British children love it is that most non-British children never had this. It is exotic to them. It is exotic to most British children too, because only about 5% of British children go to boarding schools. Hogwarts is, in the sociological sense, a rare institution that has been made available to a general readership. Layer 2 is the fairy tale. Underneath the school novel, Rowling has laid down the shape of the classic European fairy tale, the way Bruno Bettelheim described it in The Uses of Enchantment. An orphaned child. A cruel step-family. A hidden inheritance. A rescuer who arrives from outside. A journey to a magical realm. A test of virtue. A confrontation with an ogre. The Cinderella structure is stamped into the first 50 pages of Book 1 so heavily that any child reader recognizes it before it is named. Harry is Cinderella. The Dursleys are the stepfamily. Hagrid is the fairy godmother. The wand is the glass slipper. The reason the first book locks children in is not the magic. It is the fairy tale. Layer 3 is Christian symbolic architecture. This is a layer Rowling was, for years, cagey about and only fully acknowledged in a 2007 interview after the last book came out. She explained then that Christian imagery had been embedded from the beginning as the underlying spine of the whole 7-book arc. It is not evangelical. It is symbolic. The Philosopher's Stone is a piece of medieval alchemy, but it is also, in the Christian mystical tradition, a symbol for Christ. The chamber under Fluffy the three-headed dog is a catabasis, a descent into an underworld. The final chapters of Book 1 involve a child who deliberately walks into an encounter he expects to die in. Book 7, in which the same child does actually die and does actually come back, closes the arc Book 1 plants it. Layer 4 is the detective novel. This is the layer that professional writers noticed early, and that gives the book its clean plot engine. Every book in the Harry Potter series follows the structure of a fair play mystery, in the tradition of Agatha Christie. Rowling learned that structure by reading a lot of Christie in her teens, and she said, in interview, that Christie was the writer she had studied most carefully as a technical exercise. Book 1 is a fair play mystery whose puzzle is, who is trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone from the third-floor corridor? The clues are all laid down in the first 200 pages. The reader is given, at every point, enough information to solve it. The wrong suspect, Professor Snape, is the obvious one. The right suspect, Professor Quirrell, is hiding, in retrospect, in almost every scene from the moment Harry meets him in the leaky cauldron. Christie would have been proud of it. Layer 5 is British folklore. This is a subtle but pervasive layer. The specific magical furniture Rowling uses, the wand woods, the phoenix feathers, the mandrakes, the boggart, the pixie, the doxy, the grim, the augury, is drawn almost entirely from British folk sources. Rowling herself studied French and classics at Exeter and did not train in English folk tradition, but her mother's family in the west of England had a store of folk stories she absorbed as a child. The names of many of the magical creatures come from Catherine Briggs's Encyclopedia of Fairies, published in 1976. The names of many of the wizards come from British satirists and antiquarians of the 18th century. Dumbledore is an old Devon dialect word for bumblebee. Snape is a small Yorkshire village. Hedwig is a medieval saint of Silesia venerated in the north of England. Rowling is planting flags on a specific soil. That is why the books feel like they come from a particular island rather than a generic fantasy world. Layer 6 is the moral education novel. This is the layer that gives the books their staying power in adult readers. Rowling is, quietly, in the tradition of the Victorian moral Bildungsroman, the novel that teaches a child what a person is by showing them a child growing into one. Harry's moral development from Book 1 to Book 7 is a deliberate slow accumulation of chosen virtues. Book 1 gives him 3 of them. Courage, when he confronts Voldemort in the final chamber. Loyalty, when he goes to the confrontation with Ron and Hermione rather than alone. And humility, when he refuses to take credit at the feast for what his mother's sacrifice, 12 years earlier, actually did. These are not just plot points. They are the 3 virtues that Aristotle and the medieval church and the Victorian moralists all agreed were the load-bearing pillars of a good character. Rowling knew this. She said so, 20 years later. Book 1 is teaching a specific ethical system, and it is teaching it by narrative example. Layer 7, and this is the one nobody talks about, and I think it is the one that makes the book strange, is grief. The whole series begins with a mother who has died protecting her child. It ends with a mother who has died protecting her child. In between, dozens of characters lose parents, children, siblings, friends. The animating emotion of Harry Potter is not wonder at magic. It is loss. Harry Potter is, if you strip out the wands and the owls, a novel about how a child who has lost his parents in infancy grows up into an adult who can accept the fact of that loss and love other people in spite of it. Rowling has said, in a 2001 interview at Edinburgh, that she began writing the first book 6 months after her own mother died of multiple sclerosis, and that Harry's parents' death is the deepest personal thing in the whole series. Every ghost in the books, every memory in the pensive, every mirror of Erised scene, every letter from beyond, is on some level Rowling writing to her mother. Book 1 contains the mirror of Erised sequence in chapter 12. Harry looks into the mirror and sees his parents standing behind him. He does not know, at that point, what the mirror does. He goes back to it night after night. Dumbledore, when he finally intervenes, tells him gently, "This mirror will give us neither knowledge nor truth." Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they have seen. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. That paragraph is the emotional argument of the entire 7-book series. It is a grief argument. It is a father figure telling a young orphan that the fact of loss cannot be undone, but that a life must be lived anyway, and that the dead would want us to live it. Rowling is speaking to her own younger self as much as to Harry. Every adult reader who returns to book 1 at 40, 10 years after they first read it, hits the mirror of Erised chapter and closes the book for a minute. Because the layer underneath is grief. And grief, unlike the plot, does not get less loaded with time. It gets more. So, 7 layers. Boarding school. Fairy tale. Christian architecture. Detective novel. British folklore. Moral education. Grief. Any one of them would give a book a reason to work. Rowling laid down all 7, in a thin, cheap paperback with a hand-drawn cover, at a cafe in Edinburgh in the middle of the 1990s, and she left them buried well enough that the 12 editors who rejected the manuscript could plausibly claim there was nothing much there. All 12 of them were wrong. It is worth reading book 1 again as an adult. Not for nostalgia. For the engineering. If this changed how you think about Harry Potter, subscribe. We break down the most important books ever written, one argument at a time. New video every week. And if this was worth 10 minutes of your life, hit like. It helps the channel more than you think.